He forgot their 5th anniversary because the company taught him to forget what really matters. While his team celebrated deals built on silent injustice, small businesses suffered in the dark, flagged by a system designed to protect the powerful. But Han Ha-eun, the quiet engineer he once called his compass, had one final algorithm to run, and this time it exposed everything. Just wait until you hear how this confrontation unfolded and why justice, in the end, found its way back into the room. The air in Yoido was thick with summer's last breath, wet, unmoving, like the city was trying to hold something in. Han Ha-eun sat by the window in a small restaurant 2 blocks from the old broadcasting tower, the kind of place with fogged-up glass walls and handwritten menus in neat, faded ink. She had chosen it for the simplicity, just kalguksu, side dishes in chipped bowls, and a view of the Han River flickering with reflections from passing buses. She arrived 10 minutes early. The table had 2 sets of chopsticks and 1 flickering tea candle waiting to be lit. The server bowed lightly and poured her water with both hands. She smiled politely and said he would be there soon. She didn't look at her phone at first. But 20 minutes passed, then 30. At 7:43, she checked the shared calendar they both used to track mundane things: groceries, dog vaccinations, apartment inspections. The evening was blocked off as vendor review, no location, just that, on a Saturday. She tilted the screen slightly away from the light and stared at it, searching for something her logic could cling to. Maybe he had mixed up the dates. Maybe he was trapped in some kind of obligation he couldn't escape. Maybe he'd walk through the door in a moment, out of breath, flowers in hand, ready to apologize and fix it all with laughter. At 8:01, the flowers came. Not with him, by courier. White lilies, tall, fragrant, expensive. The kind she once told him reminded her of funerals. The card was typed. No name, no signature. To new beginnings, S. She turned the card over as if the truth might be on the back, but it was blank. The scent of the lilies was overpowering now. The petals, perfect and waxy, curled upward like they were listening. The server returned gently and asked if she still wanted the candle lit. Ha-eun shook her head once, not trusting her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice or call anyone. She simply stood, placed the unopened utensils in a neat pile, and left the flowers in the chair across from her. Outside, the city felt too bright. Crosswalk signals blinked through thin mist. Cicadas buzzed like wires shorting out. She walked toward the subway with the paper bag of lilies in one hand, her grip too tight, the stems cutting damp circles into the paper. Her shoes clicked rhythmically against the pavement, a sound louder than it should have been. On the train, the car was quiet. A few couples sat with their hands barely touching, the space between them filled with tired affection. She stared at the window, watching her own reflection overlap with tunnels, posters, strangers. At 9:11 p.m., her phone buzzed. It was a forwarded image from a fintech gossip channel, one of those anonymous threads where junior employees traded rumors like currency. The photo was taken from a rooftop bar in Gangnam, bright skyline behind them. Mirapay banners fluttered subtly behind the glass. And there, in the center of the shot, her husband, Nam Sung-min, smiling in a navy blue suit, raising a glass in the direction of a woman in a cream blazer. The caption was playful, "Partnership Prince to get his crown." Her breath left slowly. She zoomed into the photo. The woman's hand was resting lightly on Sung-min's forearm. His face, relaxed, proud, a little flushed. Not the expression of someone who had simply forgotten. It was the look of someone who had chosen to be elsewhere. At home, she didn't turn on the lights. She placed the lilies in the sink. No vase, no water. Her laptop flickered to life as she sat down. The hum of the fan filled the room. Ha-eun wasn't a suspicious person by nature. She was a builder of systems, of logic trees, of fail-safes that caught human error before it spiraled. As a senior data engineer at MiraPay, she worked with the quiet infrastructure, transaction flows, fraud detection, internal tooling no one ever thanked her for unless it failed. She pulled up the internal logs and accessed their synced household calendar through the back end, confirming the vendor review event. No edits, no updates. The metadata showed it was created 5 days ago. The event's notes were empty. She ran a custom parser she had once built for testing SMS filters, her own little tool. She fed the number that had sent the restaurant flowers into it. Then, almost mechanically, she cross-checked the delivery metadata with her corporate directory access. A result blinked back. The device belonged to Se-Yuna, known internally as Sarah. Title: Executive Liaison to Strategic Growth Partnerships. She had a clean digital footprint, no red flags, a polished profile photo, fluent English, 2 years younger than Ha-eun, no technical background. And yet, her name appeared often in logs tied to project approvals, vendor adjustments, risk flag overrides. Ha-eun sat still for a long time. At 23:13, her phone buzzed again. A message, encrypted. He forgot because the city remembered him. You should too. S. Then, a second later, a location pin dropped. A members-only rooftop lounge in Gangnam. She stared at the message. Her hand didn't tremble. Instead, she felt a strange detachment, like watching someone else's story unfold. She saved the message, then took a deep breath. The air felt heavier now, like the city itself was watching. She opened a hidden directory on her drive, /edge-cases/blacklist. She hadn't touched it in months. It wasn't official work, just a folder she started after a customer support call 3 months ago, when a tiny family-run shop in Mapo had been flagged by the fraud detection system she helped design. The owner had called in tears, asking why his funds were frozen. No one had an answer. The algorithm was proprietary. Risk escalation due to anomalies, someone had shrugged. That night, she and Sung Min had argued. She said, "We built something that breaks real people." He said, "It's just one case, we'll fix it." But no fix came. Tonight, she clicked into the folder. It contained incomplete notes, log captures, early code snippets for a tool that might one day detect unintended bias in risk decisions. She stared at the folder for a long time. Then, very slowly, she began typing again. Not like someone panicking, not like someone wounded, like someone preparing for surgery. Quiet, precise, and fully awake. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be the one waiting anymore. Tomorrow, the system would wait for her.
There's a particular silence that only systems know, one born not of absence, but of intentional omission. The kind of silence written in exclusions, not words. Ha-eun sat in her living room, face lit by the screen, while outside, the city turned off its lights one office tower at a time. The MiraPay data lake was immense, partitioned, sandboxed, encrypted, versioned. Most of it was harmless noise, system logs, transaction flags, retention audits. But buried deep, behind an obsolete gateway marked only by a legacy string, Sandbox Kite Backup V1, was a file she'd encountered months ago during a network trace. At the time, she told herself not to touch it. It was probably temporary, experimental, above her clearance. Tonight, that excuse no longer served. She authenticated quietly, no alerts fired. Nothing was hidden, just forgotten by design. The file didn't call itself a blacklist. It had no scary labels, no warning banners. It was a spreadsheet inside a bucket. Its name was neutral, clinical. Dynamic_risk_cohort_Q4_extended. When she opened it, the columns bloomed with familiarity. Client ID, risk score override, fraud flat status, manual reviewer assigned, override reason, VIP. VIP. She froze. That tag had haunted her once, seen only briefly in a corrupted error log during a server timeout. At the time, she'd flagged it mentally. Investigate when you have context. Now she had context. And context changed everything. VIP immunity. That's what it stood for. Not in the documentation, not in training, just in passing remarks between people who didn't expect to be overheard. She scrolled down the file. Some entries looked ordinary at first. Corner bakeries, delivery kiosks. But their risk scores were abnormally low, despite payment anomalies. Others stood out like neon stains. A club owner with 4 unresolved compliance reports. A real estate broker under preliminary regulatory review. An import merchant whose inventory flagged as unverifiable 23 times in 1 quarter. The cohort wasn't removing risk. It was redirecting it. For every exempted account, another one elsewhere had been pushed into elevated scrutiny. Delays, holds, frozen disbursements. Small vendors, florists, food stalls, repair shops, marked as suspicious by an invisible scale they never saw, based not on behavior, but on absence from this list. Ha-eun's fingers tightened on the trackpad. At row 212, the cursor stopped. Nam Sung-min. Title, Partnership Director. Internal note, High-Value Strategic Associate. Liaison Contact, co.y@mirepay.car. She read it 3 times. No error, no impersonation. He was on the list. So was she, in a way. She was the quiet partner in the home where this man returned each night. She was the one who listened when he said he felt conflicted about certain decisions. She was the one who kept believing that at his core, he was still the boy who once fixed broken door hinges with spare wires and said, "Let's never build anything we wouldn't want to live inside." Her anger didn't arrive in a scream. It came in pieces, collected, sequenced, like a program compiling before it runs. Not against the woman in the cream blazer. Not even solely against Sung-min, but against the system, the one dressed in PowerPoints in market language, the one that made betrayal look like professionalism and exploitation look like optimization. She closed the file and switched screens. In a separate window, the internal gossip channel flickered to life again. A new image. Sarah, glass raised, smiling directly into the lens. Behind her, Sung-min, flushed with wine or pride or both. The caption read, "He's earned it. He knows how to play. @junior_audit Anon." Play. As if moral consequences were optional. As if the score was determined by proximity to power, not what it cost others. In a quiet rage, Ha-eun dug deeper. She accessed her training dataset archive, an offline collection of anonymized Slack threads she had once gathered to build a sentiment classifier for internal support chats. Among them was a folder labeled /ops_pilot_feedback. There it was. Sarah Ye, move the little guys into elevated risk, makes our VIP metrics clean for investors. Product manager, that's not how this is supposed to work. Sarah, we're the ethics. Investors want clean ratios. Clean ratios don't ask questions. She leaned back, breathing shallow. This wasn't just a questionable decision. It was policy dressed in confidence, built on plausible deniability, enabled by people like her who wrote code and trusted that others wouldn't weaponize it. She didn't print anything, didn't leave any trace on office systems. Instead, she wrote a local script, lightweight, no external calls, that crawled the directory tree and generated cryptographic digests of every file, every timestamp, every modification trail. These digests would later prove that the data hadn't been altered. They were the digital equivalent of sealing envelopes before court. It wasn't revenge she felt. It was precision. Around 4:20 a.m., her eyes burning, she stood up. She walked to the sink where the lily still sat, limp and untouched. She took a pair of scissors and, almost without thinking, trimmed the stems too short. They couldn't stand in a vase now. They collapsed sideways into a cereal bowl half filled with water. The petals soaked until the edges turned translucent. Not a metaphor, just a fact. She sat on the floor beside them, phone dark, laptop fan cooling slowly. And she waited for the sun. At dawn, when the city was still too quiet to lie, she stood in front of the mirror in the hallway and tried to say something. Anything. A confrontation, a warning, a confession. But the words hadn't settled yet. The truth was still molting. So she did the only thing that made sense. She said nothing. Not yet. She just stared at herself for a long time and reminded the reflection of something she was starting to believe again. She knew what systems did, and more importantly, she knew how to break them.
She didn't text. She didn't warn. Instead, Han Ha-eun zipped up her gray hoodie, the same one she wore during overnight outages, the one that smelled faintly of soldered wires and coffee gone cold. She tied her hair back without care and walked out into the quiet Seoul dawn, the city still blinking itself awake. She looked like any engineer coming off a shift. Forgettable. That's what she wanted. The building's guard didn't recognize her at first. His posture stiffened as she approached the rooftop elevator, invite only. But then he caught the company badge clipped to her side pocket, and something shifted. Recognition, discomfort, maybe both. He stepped aside. The rooftop was curated like a lifestyle blog. String lights stretched between glass railings, a DJ soft fading between beats, and flutes of champagne sweating on marble trays. The skyline behind them glowed in soft blue, a city dressing itself in confidence. Near the edge, framed by the high-rise horizon, Nam Sungmin stood with a glass in hand, caught mid-congratulation. A small crowd surrounded him, team leads, vendor partners, brand managers. He laughed at something someone said and lifted his glass again. And then he saw her. His eyes registered her like a system flag, unrecognized input in a familiar environment. He didn't panic. He didn't rush to greet her. Instead, there was a pause. Small, trained, a flicker of muscle memory learned in boardrooms and internal reviews. Then he smiled. Just enough. Vendor review ran late, he said, voice too casual, too rehearsed. Then softer, as if reaching for their old language. You look tired. I worked, she said. Happy anniversary. She didn't blink. Her voice didn't waver. She simply stood still, her presence heavier than the skyline behind her. The music faded into background static. People kept talking. No one noticed the moment cut. From the side, a woman approached. Cream blazer, polished neckline, professional ease. Sarah. Her movements were measured, but her smile was fixed, like it had been placed there by a branding team. You must be Ha-eun, she said, extending a cool hand. The backbone, I've heard so much. Ha-eun took the hand, shook it once, and held the gaze. Oh, she said, lightly, as if recalling a footnote. You're the liaison on VIP. I love the part where you told an algorithm to move the panic. Sarah smiled held, but it tightened, just slightly, like a cinched seam. I deal in relationships, she said smoothly. Relationships that remind husbands to forget, Ha-eun replied, her tone not sharp, but surgical. She wasn't aiming to wound, just to expose. For a breathless second, there was nothing between them but the sound of the city breathing below. Then Sungmin gestured awkwardly. Let's step out, he muttered. They moved to the stairwell landing. Steel rails, morning chill, the scent of concrete and cold metal. The noise of the rooftop dulled to a throb above them. Neither spoke right away. He tried first. The list? ... saves our quarter, she finished, the words clean, practiced. It also broke a banchan shop in Mapo. Do you remember the owner? The one who sent you homemade kimchi after you helped with onboarding? He's now flagged as cash flow fog. His account was frozen for 10 days. He cried on the support line. It didn't sound like anger.
It sounded like choking. Sungmin looked down at his hands. There was a small scar across the back of his left, faint, white, forgotten. From their first apartment, years ago, when a falling dish slipped from a cabinet and he caught it instinctively. He had bled then, not for work, not for strategy, just because she was close. He didn't say anything. "They told me it's temporary," he finally offered, his voice quieter now, like a child reciting what he'd been told. "Just while we ease the KYC transition. You know how fast we're scaling. Investors need clarity. The board isn't the city," she said. "But someone texted me last night like they were." She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone and showed him the screen. He forgot because the city remembered him. "You should too. S." Below it, the location pin, the rooftop lounge, the lilies. Sungmin stared at it. A lie sat just behind his lips. She could see it forming, but it never came out. He swallowed it like something too bitter to say out loud. "I should have been there," he said, and this time he meant it. She tilted her head. "Not should," she said calmly. "Will." There was no yelling, no confrontation, no demand for apologies. Just silence, the kind that closes in like a verdict. Then she pulled a small device from her pocket, a wired lapel recorder, the type used in voice data modeling. She placed it in his hand. "Wear this," she said, "at the board prep tomorrow." He stared at it. "Ask simple questions, that's all. No dramatics. Just let them speak. Ask, why does VIP exist? Who approved it? Do we disclose it to the risk committee? Keep your voice even. Be curious." "And if they don't answer?" he asked, a note of fear creeping in. She met his gaze and held it. Then he smiled. "Then you'll hear who you are." For a second, he wasn't sure what she meant, if it was a threat, a warning, or something deeper. But she wasn't trying to break him. She was reminding him of the man he used to be.
The meeting took place in a room designed to make people feel safe. Its name, Aurora, or maybe Horizon, was printed on the glass in soft gray letters just above a curved conference table that looked like it belonged in a wellness startup rather than a fintech powerhouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the city back at itself. Bottled water stood at every seat, the labels all turned the same way. Inside, the air was clean, the stakes invisible. Nam Sungmin adjusted his collar and sat straighter than usual. The recorder rested flat against his chest, taped discreetly behind his inner jacket pocket. He could feel it, not like a weight, but like a reminder. This time, he couldn't pretend not to hear. The CEO, shirt collar open like always, his signature style, an attempt to be both casual and commanding, spoke first. "The cohort," he said, pacing slowly as he often did, "is not about manipulation. It's nuance. It's smart segmentation. Regulation, after all, is a conversation." The CO nodded supportively and ran through pre-approved phrases from their internal risk playbook. Scenario modeling, disproportionality mitigation, selective pressure adjustment. None of them said what the file actually did. Sarah took the lead on slides. Her deck was branded in corporate navy and soft gradients. The title, Optimized Risk Routing. The tone was calm, calculated, clinical. "Statistical compassion," she said, gesturing toward a diagram, "is how we reduce friction for priority users while temporarily reallocating scrutiny to merchants with higher volume tolerance." The sentence sounded almost generous. From across the room, Sungmin's voice cut in, low and slower than usual. Through the recorder, each syllable dropped like a single step on a long, narrow staircase. "What happens," he asked, "to the shops that get flagged as a result?" There was a beat of silence. "Education," Sarah said, still smiling. Then, almost at the same time, the CFO spoke without thinking. "Loss." The word hung there, unclaimed. Sungmin didn't blink.
Do we disclose the VIP cohort to the board risk committee? The CEO didn't flinch. He gave a small, knowing smile, the kind that executives learn over years of polishing inconvenient truths. We disclose what is material, he said, and we decide what is material. Sungmin leaned back slightly. The recorder caught everything, not just the words, but the sound of how they were said, the self-assurance, the strategic silence in between. 2 floors below, in a small cafe across from the building's south wing, Ha-eun sat with her laptop open, her headphones on, and no audio playing. She didn't need to stream the meeting. She never hacked or spied. But she watched signals. She monitored device pings, calendar statuses flipping from tentative to busy, a permissions log updating for the board briefing archive, the draft of an investor Q&A letter being edited by 3 hands in real time. Her scripts hashed everything, line by line, timestamp by timestamp. Not to leak, to preserve. She wasn't chasing headlines, she was protecting the record. At 10:01, she closed her laptop and walked to the legal wing. She stepped into a modest office with no view, where the company's in-house counsel, Park Ji-hai, sat at her desk reviewing a compliance spreadsheet. Ji-hai looked up and froze for a second. Then she saw the expression on Ha-eun's face. It was the look people wore during triage, when there was no time left to pretend it would all resolve quietly. Ji-hai stood and closed the door. Ha-eun pulled out a plain folder. No Mirapay branding, no proprietary files. Just a compiled, cleaned report. Query outputs, timestamps, user logs, heat maps, transaction block patterns, escalation records. At the end, a page labeled Collateral Merchant Impact Estimates based on hold durations and anonymized complaint transcripts. And a final page, handwritten. My parents' store was frozen for 3 months after a funeral deposit flagged as suspicious. They couldn't explain it, and the bank never did. On our 5th anniversary, I sat alone at a table and remembered the promise we made. Never become the kind of adult who breaks things and blames the algorithm. She looked up. I'm not here to sue. I'm not here for the press. I'm not interested in watching the company collapse. She paused. I'm here to remind this place that we live in it. Ji-hai said nothing. She simply read the report again, slower this time. Then she picked up her phone and called for an emergency risk committee session. Everything was official, logged, documented. She notified the CEO's office and the external compliance officer, sent a digital copy of the file to the company's secured board portal, added a timestamp. She followed procedure to the letter. No revenge, just light. By coincidence or fate, a visiting regulator from the Financial Supervisory Service was already in the building that day for an unrelated API audit. Ji-hai updated the meeting agenda, including his name formally, and invited him in. Transparent, within policy. When the committee convened, Sungmin played the recording with full consent. The phrase statistical compassion landed differently in the new room. Less like strategy, more like euphemism. The CFO's accidental loss hit harder when paired with merchant transcripts describing evictions, layoffs, health bills delayed by frozen payouts. The CEO listened. His posture didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. Sarah didn't speak. She watched the regulator take notes, fast and methodically. Her smile was gone now, replaced by the kind of stillness only power learns when it realizes it might be the one being watched. Then came the last question of the meeting, from the regulator. Who is the engineer who authored this summary? Ji-hai looked toward the doorway. Ha-eun stepped in. She didn't wear a blazer or heels, just the same gray hoodie from the rooftop, the same expressionless focus. But her presence shifted the air. She didn't open with credentials. She didn't mention her job title. She didn't explain the hash chains or digests. She said, I'm someone who remembers the promises I made when the world was smaller. Someone who learned how to read logs. And then she looked across the room. Sungmin sat perfectly still, his hands folded. He looked up at her,
Not as a partner, not as an employee, but as someone remembering who he used to be. To him, she said quietly, "Someone you used to call your North." The room held the silence, not out of awkwardness, out of recognition.
The fallout didn't come as a storm. It arrived as a sequence of controlled measures, unfolding not in fury but in procedure. By the end of the week, the board convened in a special session. The VP cohort was suspended, unanimously, without euphemism. An external firm was hired to freeze all risk model updates pending review. All overrides were logged, traced, and locked for audit. The CEO, so practiced in confident abstraction, issued a letter to staff. This time, there were no metaphors, no talk of nuance or conversations, just a list of actions and an admission of oversight. Then, without ceremony, he stepped down. Administrative leave for the duration of inquiry. A sentence written to be forgettable. But not everyone forgot. Sarah resigned 2 days later. The press release said she was pursuing new opportunities in strategy and compliance. Internally, her Slack account was deactivated by the end of lunch. For the first time in the company's history, a restitution program was created. Not just a refund policy, but a formal fund. Vendors and small merchants whose accounts had been delayed or unfairly flagged could now apply for reviews by real people, with names, with the authority to say yes. No one celebrated. No emails ended with confetti emojis. But quietly, something shifted. For suing men, it wasn't redemption. It wasn't even clarity. It was choice. He declined the promotion that had once been all but promised. He accepted a formal reprimand in writing for endorsing policy he didn't fully understand. And then, without being asked, he volunteered to join the field risk team for a year, on the ground, face to face with the businesses affected by decisions made in air-conditioned rooms. No one applauded. He asked for no credit. He didn't move out, but he didn't expect anything to reset either. At home, the lilies from that forgotten night had browned, slumped sideways in their bowl. He found Ha-eun on the balcony one evening, her hair pulled back, her expression calm. The city behind her looked like a machine, quiet from a distance, humming in its own logic. "I forgot our anniversary," he said, finally. Not as confession, but as fact. A line marking how far he had drifted. She didn't turn. "She reminded you who I am," she replied. "Not bitter, not cold, just even. Me." There was a pause. Then he nodded. "You're the person who points to the map," he said, almost to himself, "when I pretend we're not lost." They didn't script a reunion. They didn't restage love. Instead, they set a table. They ate dumplings in silence, not as punishment, but as space. The kind of silence that lets things breathe without collapsing. They booked couples counseling quietly, without telling anyone. No declarations, just a calendar slot. They started walking again, by the river, like they used to. They didn't talk about the past. They counted bridges instead of promises. Sometimes that was enough. Weeks later, the Banshan shop in Mapo reopened its merchant account. No headlines, no ceremony. Just 2 jars of homemade kimchi shipped in careful wrapping, with a short note. "We remember who we are because someone else did first." On a quiet morning, Ha-eun archived her edge_cases_blacklist folder. She exported it to an encrypted drive, signed it digitally, and logged the date. She closed the lid. Then she watered a new plant on the windowsill. Put fresh lilies in a glass vase, this time with the stems trimmed long enough to stand. She didn't look at the old bowl. She didn't need to. The final entry she submitted to the official remediation archive, added with no fanfare, contained no code. Just one line of plain text. Justice, in practice, is remembering out loud. Their next anniversary came on a Thursday. He arrived early. No flowers, no grand gesture, just 2 paper cups of coffee and a cheap candle in a small glass holder. They sat at the table,
They said very little. They didn't need to. Outside, the city still kept its secrets. But inside the apartment, two people were learning how not to.